Right. Hi, Idols. Welcome. I'm glad to have you here with me. I'm Dr. Robin Sargent, owner of Idol Courses. We build transcendent courses, and I help people become idols. So today's topic is actually going to be design, seven instructional design models you need to know. And so I actually have a presentation to show you. And this is my first time using Zoom on live Facebook. So we'll see how this goes. But I figured I can't show you or talk about the models without showing you what the model looks like and kind of giving a brief explanation about what each one of those are. So here we go. Let me share my screen with you. If you're with me, I'm so happy that you're here. You feel free to say hello in the chat and let me know what you think and your comments along the way. But I will tell you, it's very tricky for me to see comments while on the Zoom. So maybe I'll get that figured out pretty soon. So here we go. I'm going to share my screen. All right, here it is. So I hope that you guys can see me. And let's go ahead and get started. And I actually picked the 7 instructional design models that you need to know because in our last session that we did last week, Talia Taylor came on and said that she just had an instructional design interview and they were asking her about some of the instructional design models. And there's one that she didn't know, and that was the Kirkpatrick model. And that just sparked to me, oh my gosh, of course, you guys, there are so many instructional design models out there. It's hard to know which ones to really know or which ones to just be familiar with, because you will be asked, even in a corporate instructional design interview, about specific models. And so I've narrowed it down to the 7 that you will get asked about and that are actually useful for you in your practice. Okay, ready? Here we go. Here are the 7. The 7 are the Addie model. You've probably heard of this one. SAM, action mapping, one of my favorites. The Dick and Carey model, Gagne's 9 events, Bloom's taxonomy, and the Kirkpatrick model. So that's it. That's what we're going to go through. And I'm just going to go through each one and describe it a little bit for you. And of course, you can get this slide deck that I'm about to show you and the notes that I put on my slide deck with that link that I've put up on the title part of this live broadcast. And I'll put it in the comments later too for you in case you didn't find that link up there for whatever reason. So here we go. So let's just go ahead and talk about like what are instructional design models. And when you start seeing these models, they can get a little convoluted, and sometimes seeing, you know, all the circles with the arrows and these diagrams, they, you know, can be a little overwhelming. And basically all that an instructional design model is, it's a guideline and a framework so that you have a system in place to build in a like instructionally effective course, or so that even if you get to the end and maybe you didn't do so well, at least you have a process to evaluate what's going wrong with that course, or how you can fix it. And that usually starts with going back to the beginning of whatever model it is that you're following. Also, with instructional design models, I'm going to show you the ones that are, you know, time tested in our field and used pretty much across the board in corporate training. And a lot of people, without even knowing it, they kind of pick and pull from each of these models just without even thinking about it. Once you get into a rhythm, if you could just stick with one model, you will be influenced and you will integrate other parts of models. You really just kind of have to find out what works for you and your team and your organization and your learners, and just kind of how you work to push out a course or some kind of instructor-led training content. All right, here goes. The Addie model. So the Addie model, of course, stands for analysis, design, develop, implement, and evaluate. And the thing about the Addie model is this really is one that you need to memorize. I know that in every single instructional design job interview I've ever had, they always ask about the Addie model. So go ahead and memorize it. Some people say it's antiquated. Some people say that there are better models to use. But the point is really is that I'm trying to move this out of my way. The point is that this is the basic structure of creating courses is the Addie model. So even if you use this same model and do it in an iterative way, or like some kind of sprint, or you can actually make the Addie model agile, and that just means like you can do little pieces and evaluate it as you go along, instead of like everyone says that this is a top-down model or a waterfall method, and that just means that it's linear, goes from like the beginning to the end. But for me, the Addie model is what I use, but I use it kind of like this diagram that you are seeing, which is analysis, design, develop, implement. But the whole time you're evaluating each piece. And so let me just give you a brief breakdown of Addie, even if you've already heard it before. Maybe you haven't, right? So analysis is it's the 5 W's and an H, right? The what, the who, the why, the when. Like I didn't say them all in order. Who, what, when, what, why, where, when, and how, right? Just like the same kind of questions you'd ask if you were an investigative reporter. That's your analysis piece of creating training. And so you have to know your audience, you have to know your learners, you have to know the problem, and you have to know what the goals are. And it's only from then, after you know all that information, and I would say that analysis is the most important part of your training development, because you might actually find out that training is not something that's going to solve this problem. If it's not a problem with knowledge or skills, and instead it has something to do with like motivation or environment or culture of the company, well, training is not going to solve that problem. And so that's why analysis becomes so key. And then once you have your answers to those kinds of questions, or at least what you think are all the answers to those kinds of questions, then you can start designing. And designing means creating your outline. It means creating your outcomes. It means this is where you do your storyboards. You decide how and what you are going to develop. And then, of course, I say that evaluate is along the sides of each part of the Addie model, because you're going to have an evaluation of these steps too, right? If you come up with the design and the outline and the storyboard, your team and your stakeholders and your subject matter experts are all going to come in and evaluate. And you can even have some beta members come in and evaluate at this stage right here during design. Then there is development. That means that you have your storyboard done if you're doing e-learning, or you have your plan in place, your outline, your scripts. The whole course is all mapped out in some kind of written form, and now you get to develop. So if it's instructor-led training, you're going to make your PowerPoints, your facilitator guides, participant guides. You get what I mean, like worksheets, whatever it is that you need to develop to deliver the students, the content to the learners or the students. That's where that happens, is in development. And then implement. Now, implement seems like, oh yeah, you just like load it up to the learning management system and it's done. But implement is a little bit more than that, especially, and that's what you really need to think about in the Addie model. You really want to roll out your course like a big kind of marketing campaign, especially in corporate. You want to get the managers on board, you want your stakeholders to promote it, and you need to implement it in a way that you know that there's going to be someone who champions the training, who like encourages the employees to take it and tells them the whys, and maybe gives some kind of incentives and motivates the learners to complete the training. So that's what implementation is all about. And that actually probably takes longer than you think because of all those pieces that I just mentioned about rolling out training. And then of course there is evaluate. And this is what I've been talking about. It's all the way through, but in the traditional Addie model, evaluation comes after you've rolled out the course, And then you can do surveys. You can look at people on the job. You can ask the managers of the learners, like, did they apply this to their work, and things like that. So like I said, I'm going to be brief. There is just one more little thing I wanted to tell you about the Addie model, and that it was first created for the U.S. military during the 1970s. So it was one of the first models created, and it's an oldie but a goodie. All right, let me know if you have any questions about the Addie model, and I'm going to keep on going to Sam. All right, so now SAM means Successive Approximation Model, and it was developed by Allen Interactions, specifically Dr. Michael Allen, owner of Allen Interactions. And this, my screen's over here, so I'm like, keep looking over here. This model it looks like complicated, but basically what you're seeing here is it starts with something called the Savvy Start. And that's basically like, it's just a kickoff meeting. So it's a kickoff meeting with everyone that's going to be involved in the project. And that's where they do the information gathering, the background of the problem. It's the preparation phase, right? It's the analysis phase of the SAM model. But then they also decide what the teams are, because in the SAM model, it's not just like one person going through the Addie model, or like a team that's just working through the Addie model together. Instead, it's a collaborative approach of teams that have like their own piece of work to do for whatever it is they decided that they're going to do. And so it starts with the design, right? So they've done the background, they've done the Savvy Start, and they're like, okay, let's start with this design. And then they prototype it, and then they push it out to like some beta users and stakeholders, and then they go back to the users from there. And so that's kind of, and they get there until they have like the design proof, right? That they can then share with users, and they keep getting it feedback from the beta testers and the stakeholders and everybody else on the team until they get like, if we're going to do e-learning, a full e-learning course, and they call that alpha. And that just means like the first version. And that first version then gets implemented, and they then evaluate and develop again from there until they have beta. And then when everything is perfect, that's gold. And that's what that gold coin is. So it's like alpha, beta, gold. And a lot of times you will do this even in Addie, right? Because you'll create an e-learning course. You've had people kind of come in and review it the whole way through with you. And then once they review it, well, then they're like, oh, we need to make these changes. You go and make them. There's beta. You run it by everybody again. Oh, we can make all these changes. We've QA'd it and all this other kind of stuff. There's our gold. So that's basically SAM summed up. There are some advantages of SAM, and I kind of have some notes so I didn't forget all of them, but it is less linear than the Addie model, so that's one advantage. It does consider various points of views, right? Because it's got all these different teams that are working on different parts of the design project. Like you might have like a group of graphic designers, media developers, e-learning developers, instructional designers might be in a different group. You see what I'm saying? And so that's how they have to all collaborate. And so that, you know, the real goal is to find out like where should they put the most amount of energy and the most amount of time through creating these prototypes. The disadvantages, right, is that it doesn't take in like risk into account during this process. And it also has a considerable amount of different teams working on different things. And so it could come out a little disjointed if there's not like excellent communication. So, and sometimes like the SAM model might not necessarily work if you're just like a one-person show. So just some considerations. Read about SAM, but know this one. You will probably be asked about this in any kind of instructional design interview. I mentioned that this one is my favorite, and this one was created by Kathy Moore. I don't know what year she put it out. Sorry, you can go look that up. But you'll see that it goes from necessary information to business change, but really it starts from what is the business change? What is that business goal? And then you work to the left-hand side of this model. And actually Kathy Moore's model is like, it looks like this, except for business changes in the model, and it has several strings, just like the one I've already shown you. But I wanted to simplify it. So like at the middle is identify the business goal and list all the actions people must take to meet that goal. And then, and of course, Kathy Moore is also a big proponent of like, if the business goal is something that cannot be solved by fixing knowledge and skills, then training does not need to be created. Training will not solve that problem. So what is the business goal? Now that you said, okay, it is a knowledge or a skill gap, what's that main business change that you want to see? And then from there, you identify, well, why aren't people already taking these necessary actions? And for each action, you'll list those actions, and then you'll list what makes it hard for somebody to reach that action. And so that is where the actions needed to reach the goal. You list all those out. And so this could be several different ones of actions reaching, pointing towards the target. And then based on those actions that the learners need to be able to take in order to make that business change, you create practice activities for these actions. Not quizzes, you know, and not tests, but practice activities. And so what is it they have to do on the job so that they will take the actions that make the, like, that reach the business goal? And so, and you want those practice activities to mirror the actual environment that they're working on in as much as possible, as real world and as realistic as possible. This also helps you cut out the clutter, right? Because a lot of times when we come up through school and the university and the high school and the elementary school, you just have to know things. But in corporate training, it's about, well, what do they need to do? And what do they need to practice doing so that they can change their behaviors and reach those goals? And then the fourth thing is, see, information doesn't come till last, because what do they actually need to know to be able to practice, right? Because a lot of times they can just pull information by having to practice, and you don't have to push any information on those learners. So don't be telling them when the company started in order for them to reach a business goal of selling more widgets. Anyway, action mapping. This was one of the first things I found when I became an instructional designer. And I think that it really also is excellent to know and to have in your mind when you go and meet with your stakeholders in a corporate instructional design setting, because this is something that stakeholders and people in business can understand and they can respect, and it can also help you work with your subject matter experts so that they, when they hand you those 272 slide decks and say, here's the content for the training, you have clear things that you can ask them. Well, what are the actual actions that they need? How can they practice? What are some scenarios based on this information? And then what do they actually need to know to practice the actions that we want them to take? Right. Let me know if you have any questions about action mapping and if you've ever heard of this one before. The next one is Gagne's 9 Events of Instruction. And so this one actually came out of his book called The Conditions of Learning. And there are some mental conditions of learning. So he created these 9 steps. And while this might not necessarily be an instructional design model that you use to create corporate training, it's still something that you will be asked about in an interview. And it's something that, you know, instructional designers like to talk about in the field. And so that's why I put this one on there. It's a very popular model. And I like this part, which is get attention, right? What's your hook? That's number one. Present objectives. So tell the learners what they're going to learn. And a lot of people do that in a way that's presents the learning objectives. And there's some debate about this, but really you can tell people what they're going to learn by telling them like what's in it for them instead of saying, by the end of this course, you will be able to. That's not necessary, right? You saw how I did it? I said, hey, this is what we're going to cover. I didn't say, by the end of this training, you'll have identified the Addie model. No, come on. We don't have to do that anymore. You just have to present objectives, but not necessarily in learning objective speak. The other thing is stimulate recall of prior learning. And this is important to remember even like kind of in the design part of your creation of your course, because we are always scaffolding, right? When you think about the mind, we are always just building on other things that we already have and know. And so if you can find a piece of somebody's knowledge that they already have, former knowledge, and build on top of that, that's how our neurons work anyway. That's how we build new neurons. Things don't disappear. Instead, we build on top of what we already have. And so if you can make that connection to prior learning, then you're going to make it sticky. We like to say that, sticky learning, right? And then the other thing is present stimulus. That just means give them the content, right? Provide guidance. That's examples. So that's stories, that's scenarios. That's what Kathy Moore is talking about when she's talking about the practice activities. These are the examples. And elicit performance. Same thing, like a lot of these have like very similar things, right? They're all kind of on the same page. It's just what model is going to work for you, but know them all. And so that's when you have the practice activities, and then they got to get feedback, right? That's number 7. You've got to provide feedback for them so that they know, like, you can practice, but if you're not practicing correctly, then it doesn't matter, because you have to know that like what you're doing is the right way to do things. So just think about even in e-learning, when you give somebody feedback, don't just go, wah, wah, you're wrong. Instead, give them like real feedback. Like if you're doing a scenario like, oh, you handed the doctor the scalpel the wrong way, and now he sliced his hand open. Whatever. You see what I'm saying. And then the 8th one is assess performance. So now they've gotten to practice, they've gotten feedback. Now it's time for them to show you. So learn, do, show, right? Learn, do, teach, whatever. Same thing. Now it's time for them to show you that they got it. They have made improvements based on the feedback that they were given. And then next is retention and transference. So that's just reinforcing the training that you've already given them. Have you guys heard of Gagne's 9 events of instruction before? Definitely just kind of remember the flow, remember what he talked about, and that's about all you really need to know. But of course, you can always dive deeper. All right, Dick and Carey. So this is another popular instructional design model. As you can see, it is also 9 steps. So it is also 9 steps, and it's also called the systems approach model. So you might hear it called both things, but mostly I always hear it called the Dick and Carey model. But if you see somebody or you hear somebody in an interview say, oh, are you familiar with the systems approach model? You can say yes, 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 yes. And it was also published in 1978, and their book was entitled The Systematic Design of Instruction. And so they're a big deal. They're a big deal in our field. So go read about them if you are so inclined to do. But basically what they start out with is, what are the instructional goals? And they start with those goals first before they do the analysis. And that's but their analysis is like, what kind of skills do the students already have, right? So what kind of level are they on, and what skills do we need to build upon? And then from there, you can determine like those performance objectives, back to those learning objectives again. This is like the design part of the Addie model. And then give them assessments or tests, or kind of like a pre-test almost, and really validate where they are in their skills. And then you give an outline of the lesson plan, you create your materials, you give a formative evaluation. So there's two types of evaluations. You'll hear these. It's called formative and summative. And don't let these words intimidate you. Instead, formative just means like, say you have a lesson, one lesson in a module, right? And so in this lesson, you want them to complete a certain objective, like, I don't know, you want them to be able to balance their bank account. And it's maybe the whole course is about personal finance. I'm just coming up with this. Okay. And so the formative assessment, because the lesson is on balancing a checkbook, the formative assessment is to like give them a checkbook and like have them fill in the holes to balance the checkbook. That's formative. Summative would be like, like they are now going to like create an entire plan for reaching their financial and personal goals and creating a 10-year plan. And that includes like balancing their budget or their checkbook or whatever. Does anybody even have a checkbook anymore? But anyway, that's the difference between summative and formative. Formative is like a piece of one objective being met. Summative is like the whole of the course. A formative evaluation and then your summative. All right, now we are on to the 6th instructional design model. Let me know if you have any more insight about Dick and Carrie, or if this is new to you. Okay, here we go. Bloom's taxonomy. All right, so you're like, what, is this a model? I'm like, well, yeah, it's a model that you need to know for an interview. And it is a model for how you can create learning objectives. And it's also a great way to understand the process of learning. So Bloom's taxonomy is basically a hierarchy of knowledge. And so it's, you know, before you can understand a concept, you must remember what that concept is. And to apply that concept, you must first understand it. And in order to evaluate a process, you have to have analyzed it. And to create an accurate conclusion, you must have completed some kind of thorough evaluation. So it starts with remember, and then it goes all the way up to create. So if you're doing rote memorization, that's the building block for your learning. So that's why you see a lot of that happening in elementary schools, for instance, right? They got to learn their states, so they got to keep practicing just to remember what those states are. And then they can move on in their cognitive abilities, and they can go to understanding and applying that information, and so on and so forth. And the great way to use Bloom's taxonomy is for writing your learning objectives, because based on where your students are, when you write your, there's my dog, that's 5. There's obviously someone at the door. And so when you write your learning objectives, you think, well, what level are these students at, or these learners at? And you can create these learning objectives, and then you create summative and formative assessments and activities based on where they are in Bloom's taxonomy. So if they are at the level, say they're at apply, which is what a lot of what you'll want them to do in corporate training, then you will have them implement things into their workplace or into their job or into their role. And you see how that's how you write your learning objective. By the end of this course, learners will be able to implement pressing the right key on the keyboard, whatever. You see what I'm saying? Bloom's taxonomy, that's certainly something that you're going to be asked about. It's a great tool. Make sure, though, that whatever verbs that you use in writing your learning objectives are measurable. So understand is not a measurable verb, because like, how the heck do you know if somebody understands something, right? Instead, you need to measure it in, you have to use verbs that are measurable. And so there's actually been an update to Bloom's taxonomy that uses all measurable verbs. You can go check that out. All right, ready? It's our last one. All right. I told you I didn't want to like swamp you in instructional design models, but I do want you to be familiar with the ones that you have to know, and you can of course download the guide that we gave you. All right, here it is, the Kirkpatrick model for evaluation. And this is actually the worldwide standard for evaluating effectiveness of training, and specifically corporate training, because it considers like the value. What is with the return on investment for formal or informal training that you've delivered? So level one, this is the reaction evaluation. So this is like right after that instructor-led training, and you hand out the surveys and you're like, how did I do? And how did it go? Did you learn something? And this is usually, and everyone's like real happy and they enjoy the course, and like 10 out of 10, 10 out of 10. So this is like their initial reaction to the material that was presented, right? And then level two, well, did they actually learn the material? And this is usually captured by some type of assessment, formative or summative, right? And so that's level two. And then level three, this is what are the behaviors that they have learned and have actually changed and are using on the job. And a lot of people miss this measurement, but it's important, and you are an idol, so you definitely are going to measure this. And the way that you measure behaviors is actually usually captured through some kind of survey of the managers of the employees that took that training. And so that's how you really know, like, okay, hey, so we rolled out this training like a month ago. Are your people doing what they're supposed to do? Have sales increased? Whatever that is. Are they making more phone calls? That kind of thing. Go and ask those managers. That's usually the most likely way that you will get a measurement on behavior change in the learners. And the fourth level is results. And this is what your stakeholders and this is what your company cares about. They care about what is the result. And this is also what you should care about, because if you get the results and you measure those results and you prove those results in some kind of form of or capability, then you are seen more as an asset to the organization, because your position and your role in the company drives real results. It's not just something that is a burden for the employees. And so to evaluate results, this really has to be about getting into the data for the business. And this is also kind of why you also want to think about results before you start creating your training. That's like why Kathy Moore says, like, what's that business change that you want? And how is that business change going to be measured? If you know that up front, then at the end, you can go back, you can look at that data, say, I'm going to sales. If you go to say, because that's easy to measure, right? And although there might be several different variables about why sales go up or down, you can look at maybe how many more outbound calls are there if you did, like, sales process training or something like that. And those are the things that your company keeps track of. And if you go to the right people, you can get access to that data and look at the dates, like, okay, this is how many outbound calls they're making at this time before the training. And then after the training about making more phone calls and setting more meetings, this is what our system says has happened since then. So those are our results. So anyway, that's it. These are the 7: Addie, Sam, Kirkpatrick, Gagne's 9 invents of instruction, the Dick and Carey model, and Bloom's taxonomy. Oh, and action mapping. So I hope this was helpful for you and informative. And don't forget to get my slides if you want them. And thanks again for joining me. And I guess I'll see you next week. Hey, if you guys want to do have me come on and do a Q&A and just like answer random questions, feel free to message me or leave a comment. I'm also kind of interested in doing a Facebook Live where I have one of you come on and you like share your portfolio or your resume or some kind of job application asset. And I give you feedback right here on Facebook Live so that other people can see like the changes that you need to make to your resume or portfolio, and they can like take that same kind of information and apply it to their own resume or portfolio. So if you'd like to be my guinea pig for that Facebook Live, send me a message, hit me up, send me an email, whatever it is. And I think that'd be fun to do. And I'd love to have you and help you out. So bye for now. Bye, bye, bye.